Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Venturing Abroad, a podcast by Daphne, where we explore what it means to build a career across borders, cultures, and industries. I am Erica, and I'm happy to be joined by Madison, one of our investors here at Daphne, for this conversation. Hey, Madison, how are you doing today?
Hey, Erica. I'm doing very well. We have a beautiful gray and rainy day here in Paris. So,
That we
living
do.
that February life, but really happy to be here. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Me too. Well, why don't I go ahead and introduce our guest? Today, we are thrilled to welcome Denise Peck to Venturing Abroad. Denise is a global technology leader with over 30 years of experience, whose career spans some of the most transformative moments in Silicon Valley. From beginning her career at Sun Microsystems before its IPO, where she went on to spend many years at Cisco, where she served as Vice President of Marketing and later Vice President of Marketing Business Operations. In 2008, Denise took on an expat role in Shanghai, representing Cisco on a global stage during the World Expo, bringing her career full circle back to the city where she was born. In this conversation, we're excited to talk about building a career across functions and geographies, what it takes to lead in different cultural contexts, and the lessons learned from scaling global tech companies. Denise, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to speak with you. Welcome to Venturing Abroad.
Well, thank you, Erica and Madison. I'm so delighted to be here and to share a little bit of my life and career journey with you.
Thank you. Well, Denise, I would love to get us started by taking us back to the beginning of your story. You were born in Shanghai, China, with a Chinese name, and I'd love to know, how did you become known as Denise, which is a name that, fun fact, actually has French origins?
Thank you for that. That's taking me way back. Yes, I was born in Shanghai, China, and when I was 5, we moved to Hong Kong. And when I was 8, my immediate family and I emigrated to San Francisco. And my original Chinese name, growing up, I spoke Shanghainese and then Mandarin. And it was in Mandarin Chinese is Wang Yingjuan, is Cantonese is Wang Winggun. So as you can hear, they're very different. There are also tones and phonemes that are don't exist necessarily in American English. So when I got to third grade in San Francisco, my father decided that it may make sense for me to have more of an English sounding name. So here was my brother and my father and me and my mother. And one night, it was very late. They had gotten a names book, one for boys and one for girls. And they started sounding out, in their broken English, what they thought the names were. They started at A. My brother was very, very tired. And so they started with, I'm sure, all the boys' names with A and then went to B. Well, he kind of was so tired, he stopped at Brian. So my brother's name is Brian. And so with me, I had a little bit more energy and they went through the A's, they went through the B's, they went through the C's. And then when they got to D, I got very tired. So I stopped at Denise. And that was the name that I got to pick, even though I'm sure my father wasn't pronouncing it correctly, but that was the name when it stopped and it became my name. And it
Wow.
wasn't until I got to France in my third year of college that I realized that everybody tells me that it's a French name and, where did that come from? So that's kind of the origin and the history, and I'm very happy to be multicultural that way. I have both Chinese names
Mhm.
and American names.
That's incredible. I love hearing that story and also what a power to have as a child. I think it's everyone's dream in some way to be someone else when you're a child. And I think choosing your name, I know in the US we often have in language classes, you get to choose what your name is. So that's a really cool opportunity to integrate and really change, I think, one aspect towards your American side while still keeping your heritage and where your story started, I guess. So I'm really curious about how that has maybe impacted you and how you've kept both sides very much alive since making that big decision, and also what it felt like as a child to have such a big decision put upon you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in San Francisco, in Chinatown, and then later on in the outer skirts of the city. And I grew up in what was essentially, even though it was America, an Asian majority neighborhood. And so it wasn't until I went to high school and college that I even had non-Asian friends. So for a long time there, San Francisco is so multicultural. I was able to grow up in that and retain some of my original mother tongue, and grew up with kids who had the same kind of Asian American background. I knew from growing up in that background, however, that it was different. It wasn't like being in China or being in Hong Kong. And I was fascinated by how lives and cultural habits and customs and traditions could be different. And so, very early on, I had adopted this notion that I want to learn more about the world. And that really influenced me to take French, for instance, starting in seventh grade, and went on through the university. And I finally decided I had to just kind of get immersed in it, and then went to the University of Grenoble as a third year French student. So that helped me to see another side of the world. And I was the only Asian, really, in many circumstances by the time I got to France.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. I think already at such a young age, having lived in three very different cultures, what do you think the biggest learnings were from, I guess, going from China to the U.S. and then to France at a young age, and then I guess to shift towards how it's impacted your career and what you wanted to do for the rest of your career?
Yeah. Obviously, language is the first thing that you had to learn. I remember when I
Mhm.
first got to San Francisco, I begged my parents when they enrolled me at school to lie about my age so I could be held back another year. So it's to start in second grade rather than third grade. It was that scary, right? I mean, just didn't
Mm.
know. And they didn't do that. The school didn't allow that. And with English as a second language instruction and being immersed with other English speaking Chinese kids, I was able to pick up the language pretty quickly. And fortunately, linguistic ability is something that I'm able to adapt to pretty quickly. But I would say that the key thing is to really be observant about other cultures, understand what they're really like, and understand what's same and what's different. And this is and to adapt to them, right? And to relate to people, even if you are apart from a language perspective or from a background perspective, and to have that kind of adaptability and reaching out to people and being friendly and open and flexible. I think those traits were instilled in me pretty early, and I got to take advantage of it by going to a lot of different places and feeling like they're my either first home or second homes.
Staying on the topic of your childhood and your early education, did this influence at all your decision to pursue a career in tech?
The career in tech was interesting. I would say that uh, foundational interest in that came from my father. So my father was a first generation in his family to go to college. He was trained in Hangzhou, China as an architectural engineer. And so he was very engineering oriented. When we got to the United States, and he actually had a career in building and designing nuclear power plants with the international company called Bechtel. And he would always have all these really interesting tools. I remember we were the first in our neighborhood to get like a four function math calculator. It was an HP calculator. It was handheld.
Mhm.
It felt like a brick at the time, and all you could do were these four functions. But compared to what we have today, right? And so he always was interested in these electronic gadgets that help to improve lives or help to make things more efficient. And so when my father passed in 2017, I remember going to his house, and then we just uncovered this trove of old electronic, gadgets and equipment, from calculators to the camcorders to, cellular telephones, etc. So I think my love for technology and embracing new technology really came from him. So, by the time I got to my college years, I ended up majoring in economics. And when I came out of college, my most substantial job was 3.5 years working for an economic consulting company. And we had to build large econometric forecasting models. And they were done back in those days on a mainframe machine,
Ooh.
which today we have the power of a mainframe right in our mobile cell telephones. But back then it was done on a mainframe. I remember about the awesomeness of using computing to help my clients who were banking and insurance clients make better forecasting and decisions. So, I was drawn into technology, and in fact, within a couple of years, with teaching application programming to my clients. So that whole notion of technology enabling productivity was a big theme. And then I decided to go to Stanford Business School because that was in the middle of Silicon Valley and it was pre-PC. So it was a very interesting ride over the next ensuing 30 years to look at this computing wave going
Yeah.
from mainframes to mini computers to PCs to the internet to mobile, and then now what we have today with this huge revolution going on in AI, all enabled by everything else that came before that.
Yeah, so you've really seen the evolution of Silicon Valley since, I mean, you were a part of it since day one, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It's really amazing to watch it from the beginning,
Mhm.
and to have seen some of the people who built Silicon Valley, whether it was Hewlett Packard, where I worked briefly, and in the garage where all this stuff started, to see the rise in silicon and silicon development, right? That's why it's called Silicon Valley, to sort of so from hardware to software to services. I think that seeing all of these evolutions and waves of technology helped me to better appreciate what's going on today and to understand what absorptions rates look like and not to be scared of these
Mhm.
waves of technologies, understanding that there are always some good things to come, but there's always an adoption curve. And we don't know where things are going to go, but it's very exciting what's happening today, and it's happening faster than any other technology waves that I've seen.
Absolutely, and I think it gives a bit of a hopeful lens to how technology is accelerating because I
Mhm.
think it's very easy to be quite scared of what's happening, whether it's now or it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but to see the entire evolution, you get to see the good and the bad and then see how this can continue to progress and move technology forward. I'm curious if you were to say other than that, the tech itself, what has been the biggest change in Silicon Valley in terms of culture and dynamic and atmosphere that you've seen?
Wow, that's a big question. If I were to think about that, there's been a lot of changes. I think I talked earlier to Erica about how Silicon Valley itself has kind of moved geographically, right? So Silicon Valley used to be just San Jose, where decades ago it was just apple orchards. And then the semiconductor industry started, right? And the semiconductors enabled the hardware industry and computing to happen. And with computing came the whole Moore's law and miniaturization and trend that allows us to make things smaller but faster, and the growth curve in terms of capabilities and getting into software and services. I think some of the biggest changes is Silicon Valley has moved geographically, at least locally, much more north. Silicon Valley covers everything from the East Bay to San Francisco down to San Jose
Right.
today. So you can't just think of it as, Santa Clara, San Jose. But more importantly, I think it's the culture of Silicon Valley that has moved overseas, right? This whole notion of innovation, of startup, of trying something new, of experimentation, that is taking root. We see a lot of Silicon Valley's sort of mentality, whether it be in Israel, whether it be in France with Daphne and others, and then certainly in China. So I think that whole notion of driving technological innovation and making lives easier, and raising the standard of living for many people around the world, that's the culture of Silicon Valley.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your time at Sun Microsystems, which, as we were saying earlier, was kind of at the beginning of these different evolutions within the valley. Can you tell us about what it was like working there and what it was like being there before it IPO'd?
Sure. So just for a little bit of context, Erica, Sun Microsystem doesn't exist anymore. It got acquired by Oracle in
Right.
2010. But Sun Microsystems, when I first went there in 1985, 86, was a young company, And what it had was very novel at the time. It made engineering, technical engineering workstations for engineers, right? So people doing CAD design, mechanical design. And the reason that it was hot was because it was able to use kind of open systems. So it used a version of Unix, which,
Mhm.
can run on a lot of different computers. It wasn't a closed system. And so when I got there, it was 115 million. Shipping is second or third generation of products. And when I left, it was $8 billion.
Wow.
So riding that curve was amazing, right? It was a little chaotic. We were hiring a lot of people all the time. And the interview cycle sometimes could be kind of short because we were shorthanded. Um, and it didn't matter what your job description was. At the end of the month or the quarter, everybody was asked to go down to manufacturing to help pack out the workstation so that we could make revenue.
That's incredible.
So I had no business as an OEM program manager to be giving manufacturing tours, but I was asked to do that among other activities, right? So there were very few layers of management. So in effect, you could talk to all the key people, including the CEO, very quickly just by just running into to them in the hallways or the cafeteria. So it was very, very exciting times. We got a lot of stuff done. It was easier to coordinate, with amongst the company and the function simply because it was smaller. That wasn't necessarily the case by the time I left because $8 billion runs on different processes than a $115 million company.
And you touched on it a bit about your career, I guess, not being a single function. You've worked across many different areas from hardware, it sounds like, and really logistics to finance to business to marketing. What would you say this progression felt like? How you were able to, I guess, have these different transitions within a single company, and how did it also help your understanding of both the technology and the company on a macro level?
Thank you for that question, Madison. I get this a lot sometimes because when I was coming out of business school, the idea for people in my generation was to work for one or two companies lifetime. And you pretty much go up
Yeah.
a vertical career ladder, right? So you could go from individual contributor to a manager to a director to a VP to et cetera,
Mhm.
usually in the same function. Um, and I remember one time I was working with the CEO of Sun and he was giving me career advice. And he said, if you want to be a general manager, you need to have at least functional knowledge and expertise in two or more function. That's when I can consider you to be GM. So I thought that was very interesting. However, I did not have any aspirations to be a general manager. Frankly, I was young and I really just opted to work with really smart people solving complex problems. And if I thought it was fun and it was a growth, in terms of learning, and if it was there, I took the job. So frankly, I didn't have any career aspiration to go up a particular function or ladder, although marketing was my domain expertise and I spent more time in marketing than any other function. I would say that what people saw in me was sort of this creative problem solving skill and the ability to work with a lot of
Mhm.
different people, irrespective of functions or personalities, and getting them together in a way that we could solve a bigger problem. And so as a result, I would say that even beyond Sun, half of the jobs I got in my entire career, and by the way, I counted the other day, I think I've had 23 bosses in my entire corporate career. I would say that
Wow.
more than half of those jobs were ones where people tap me on the shoulder and say, "Will you please consider this?" And, as a result, people who saw me cross functionally, saw what I was capable of, just decided to, take the bet sometimes and just say, even though she's not an expert in our function, we'll do it. So, as an example, I was tapped on the shoulder to become the official spokesperson for the company, one of the official spokesperson for the company, to Wall Street, and that was as director of investor relations. And I
Wow.
remember when being recruited, they asked me, they said, "Well, look, we saw how well you market the operating system. We thought you could market our stock." And so somebody saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. And I'm really glad that after some deliberation, I decided to take that role. And I had a fabulous time on Wall Street for 3.5 years.
I just want to go a little bit deeper on something you mentioned, which is about being able to work with different people and the agility it takes, I think, to be pulled across different areas and domains. And that goes back to what you were initially saying about learning from different cultures and really sitting and just observing and taking everything in. So, how would you say that really led to you developing these skills that then you were able to use at Sun Microsystems and beyond?
Yeah, so I think it's all about understanding what you bring to the table first,
Mm.
right? So I think it would be foolhardy to think that that I could just become another AI engineer, for instance, right off the bat. I don't have expertise in that. In fact, one of the things that I had faced along the way was I don't have an engineering degree, and people really thought, being that this is Silicon Valley, there is this preference for people with deep understanding of the technology and and skills, whether software development or hardware development. And so you have to be very careful that you articulate what your value is and to think about how to bring that value if it's applicable to that function or the team. And more often than not, what I have found out is that I make sure that I understand that I'm going into an adjacency. In other words, an adjacency is something that's on the side that is not necessarily my major function, but where I could deliver value pretty quickly while at the same time learning what that new function is about. Right. And above it all, I think it's about leadership. It's about people skills. It's about understanding very quickly, sensing what is valued in the organization, how that organization works in terms of processes, in terms of how they're rewarded, as well as how what the penalties are when things don't go right, how to work with teams and break through
Right.
difficult conversations. So I think a lot of it is communications and people, interpersonal skills. It really is. And once you can relate to people at that level, they break down. You don't have to be the expert. I didn't have to be the expert or the best expert or the visionary in that particular function to bring value to the organization.
Before moving on to talking about your time working at Cisco, I'd love to know when you were working at Sun Microsystems, did that experience shape your risk tolerance at all, like right before you were leading up to the IPO stage
Yeah.
of the company? And did any of that experience translate to your career later at Cisco and beyond?
Yeah, thank you for that, Erica. I think, personally, I've always had a little bit of a higher risk tolerance than your average person. I wasn't
Mm,
afraid to be in the limelight. I wasn't afraid to make a mistake. That's not to say I'm completely, risky, but it's mitigated, right? It's mitigated by careful calculations. um, I would say that Sun had a very different internal corporate culture than Cisco. So at Sun, we had a CEO who was very charismatic but very brash. And he was considered a little bit almost like, a very controversial figure in the industry because of some of the things he said, that by contrast with companies like IBM and HP, with whom we were competing at the time, we would be seen as a relatively immature player, innovative but immature, right? So we had cultural values like it's better to seek forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Hmm.
Okay. So what that meant to me was code for experiment, try something bold. Okay. Don't get slowed down by having to seek approval. And, so I think you have to decide how to interpret that for your role. Right. And so playing it safe was not necessarily the best thing for my career at the time. And I did a lot of things that kind of got attention that were kind of bold and in a way that people recognize. And when you do that, then you're no longer tagged to be, oh, she's just a business operation person, just a marketing person, just a whatever.
mm-mm.
You get to define your own role in terms of the creative problem solving. And the people skills that you have. And all those things are considered leadership skills. So, I think that by the time I got to Cisco, Erica, as a comparison, right, Cisco is a much more conservative company from that perspective, very mature, very, very mature, and with very senior professional leaders. and it had acquired a lot of companies, so it had a lot of former CEOs in the company. When we have things like a business operations review with the CEO, everybody wore a suit. Nobody wore a suit at Sun. So, we had very, very different culture, and it was much bigger. It addressed a much bigger market, not just technical engineers. So its customers were more CIOs. So you had to sort of reflect the culture of your customers. So I became a little bit more conservative from that perspective and more professional, if you will.
Right. That's very empowering, everything you were saying about what you learned at your time at Sun, being bold and taking actions that define your role. You yourself are defining your role, and through that, you're able to have a deeper impact at the company, and then those skills can translate to other opportunities later. I'd love to talk maybe a little bit about an example of perhaps at your time at Cisco when you were in a leadership position. Could you share with us a story about maybe just a difficult decision you had to make or a trade off as a senior leader, and maybe in a way that can provide some advice to our listeners as to what to do in those types of situations?
Yeah, boy, there were a lot of tough situations, but I think of one that I can talk about more personally. So there was one time where I openly disagreed with my senior executive and his team on a major internal product decision. It was a product decision that,
Hmm.
if executed, was maybe a feel-good thing for our division's team from a morale perspective, but would have absolutely hurt our company and our public image. Yet I couldn't persuade my manager to my point of view. So the company had announced the decision internally to all its executives, but I decided to escalate quietly and directly to the CEO to share my dissenting opinion. And after listening, the CEO agreed with me and reversed the decision, but never revealed who had changed his mind. I knew that my escalation above my boss had the potential to end my career right then and there at Cisco, but I persisted because I truly believe it was the right thing to do for the company. It wasn't easy, it was risky, and it felt very scary, but I did it knowing it was the correct decision at that level, at the company level. So what that means to me is that leadership means that you may have to sacrifice what's best for your immediate team so that it's really about what's best for the company. So I've never really shared this story publicly, and I'll keep all the details private. But I think at some point, there's a level of integrity about what you believe in and how far you're willing to risk, ruining that integrity, compromising that integrity. So that was the one thing I had to do. It was, I'm glad I did it, and I hope that other people have that kind of encouragement and insight.
I guess, maybe a tough question is if you were to go back and let's say looking back, would you take the same risk if you weren't sure what the outcome could be? Because on the other hand, if it hadn't been the outcome you wanted, and let's say it had maybe escalated slightly differently, or the CEO hadn't taken the same decision as you, how that would have affected maybe your ability to maintain your conviction as a leader and maintain your strength in making tough decisions.
Yeah. I did weigh that, and in fact, the night before I decided to escalate to the CEO, I actually put my badge at the door. And I
Wow.
said, yeah, I mean, you have to go that far, right? And you kind of have to say, I really believe in this,
Yes.
and someday I'll be able to explain it to more people. But I was very convinced of my conviction. But looking back, as you said, it's kind of hard to say, right? I mean, I was providing for my family, I had responsibilities, I had a career,
Mhm.
but I never felt more strongly than that. If it didn't go well, I would have had to, or if it got found out, I would have had to a lot of explaining to do with my team, and I'm sure I would have had to rotate to a different function in the company. But fortunately, it didn't come to that.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you for sharing that story with us. I know it's not always easy to talk about, um, sensitive information that happens in the workplace like this. So thank you. And um, while you were working at Cisco, you had the opportunity to go back to Shanghai. where you were born, to represent Cisco at the World. Was it the World Expo or the
Mhm.
World Fair?
Yeah, it's called the World Expo.
Oh, the World Expo. How did you find this opportunity, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, well, first of all, the motivation side, and then how I found the opportunity. I was very lucky to have worked for two companies based in Silicon Valley, but I really desired from a very young age, even more global perspectives abroad, right? So having a family and raising a family here in Silicon Valley prevented me from doing that until it was time. And when my youngest child, my daughter, went off to college, then it was time to consider it. And fortunately for me, Cisco had invested quite a bit of time and energy in China, trying to accelerate its presence in China. But it had grown so big that all the different functions in China, whether it be product development, sales, manufacturing, customer support, our investment in partnering with the Chinese government, our investment in expos so that more global customers can get to know us, etc. All of that really needed to be coordinated. All of that needed to be sort of calibrated for what is the maximum ROI we can bring to the collective, not
Mhm.
just the silo investments, but the overall investments. So a team was formed to go over and figure that out. And I had to interview for the first of my life. I've never interviewed so hard for this job. And so I was the second person to be hired to the team, the first being my boss, who was the chairman of Cisco China, also an American. And,
Oh,
it
wow.
required case studies, interviews, both with the corporate team and the local Chinese team. I had two trips over there before I was offered the job. And they just wanted somebody who can be very flexible and understanding how different functions work, how to get people together, how to get people together across cultures, across corporate levels, etc. And so I ended up getting the job. Frankly, when I got the job, I wrote my job description on the plane over when I finally moved there. But when I got to ground 3 months later, the job description had totally changed. And what that meant was that you had to really pay attention to what are the signals and the data from local sources, and where's the best investment of our team's energy and how we did things, right?
Mm.
So it was fascinating because I can tell you that in China, things move so quickly. Every day was different. You may think that you have a day that, you look on your calendar and go, oh, I can predict what this day is going to look like. More often than not, something would happen, whether it's the weather, whether it's somebody canceling on you, or something new that you
Mhm.
discover that changes your mind about how you did things or whether or not you even go to certain meetings. So for me, it was endlessly fascinating in terms of what I learned. And throughout the 2 years I was there, every day was a learning experience.
That's incredible. I'd love to hear about when you went after living so long in the US and building a career there. What was the biggest surprise and what took a bit of time to maybe adapt to, but then also that you were able to take back to the US afterwards?
Yeah. So, so just stepping back for a minute, Madison, I would say that one of the attractions to China was just understanding that it was already a global superpower, but desire to go even above that, right? And it was growing very fast. It's at the time, the most populous nation on earth.
Mm.
And I was, the attraction going back to China was not only was it my birthplace, but it had experienced tremendous growth, right, during the time that I had left it, since the time that I left it. And I wanted to go back and explore it a little bit more. And also, I've never worked overseas. So this was great. So some of the things that I learned about it was the number one impression is what we Westerners are told through the media about China are not the complete story.
Mhm.
So I learned a lot of new things just by just by my pure experience. So from a organization and workplace perspective, and it's beyond that as well. But the Chinese, what people need to understand, the Chinese are organized around a hierarchy. right? So the hierarchy really, really matters. Things like titles and rank are ultra important. So I don't know whether it's changed a lot, but when I was working and living there, I saw huge title inflations. Manager titles in the US became directors there. Directors here became VPs and VPs became senior VPs, etc., right? People just printed
Mm,
different cards with different inflated titles. And it's because without a certain title or rank, local customers may or may not meet and deal with you, right?
Mm.
So they're very, very title sensitive, and they want to make sure that you have a certain level of decision making authority, as exhibited by that. So things are always ranked number one boss, number two boss, number three boss. Colloquially, this is what people would call you. And whether it's their annual exam for college entrance exams, things are ranked, your grades are ranked. So hierarchy is really, really key. So if you understand what that means, then, where you are relative to somebody that you're speaking to, then there's a certain protocol in terms of how you deal with them. Okay. And so that's important to understand. Secondly, is that also reflects more of a top-down command and control style of management, right? So senior managers and people in executive positions are expected to know what's best and to make the decision and just expect their team to execute those decisions, sometimes with a little discussion, even if there is dissent, right? You're just expected to do it. So my experience in the US, by contrast, is that decisions are generally more discussed and debated, and opinions from employees from all levels could be more freely shared and expressed. And it's what we in the West call collaboration or collaborative decision making. But would not be so much the case in traditional larger Chinese companies that I have seen.
interesting.
Right. So I can give you an example of that if you're interested in terms of a personal example.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I once had an all hands meeting with some local Chinese employees as well. So I floated an idea that seemed to me a little bit out of box idea, and I asked publicly for feedback on that. No one raised their hand or commented publicly. And then it occurred to me that maybe people might have felt uncomfortable with speaking English or providing candid feedback publicly, especially constructive feedback to a
Mm.
senior executive. So I sensed and was uncomfortable with the prolonged silence. I then announced that I would hold office hours the rest of the days in my office so people could drop by to chat. When I returned to my office, there was a line of people waiting to talk with me one on one about my proposal.
Oh my
So in
Oh,
goodness.
that's
private,
so
they were
cool.
more open and more candid. This is how I adapted to the local cultural norms and still got what I wanted. And
Interesting.
the company at the time had a value around collaboration. So I felt that I really needed to talk to people, but I just had to do it a different way. Now, collaboration can take a lot more time and energy, and that was fine, but I got what I needed by adapting.
Wow, that's incredible. It goes exactly back to what you said about sometimes you just have to wait, listen, see how other cultures work, and then you're prepared. So I guess it leads to our next question is what advice would you give for people maybe in similar positions? They're looking to change their professional life and move abroad. How should they go about this? What would be your biggest point for them to think about when they're in these now very fast, very quickly moving markets and sometimes very unfamiliar cultures?
Yeah. So I think having the right mindset and intention is really critical, right? So you have to invest in understanding the local culture, even if you don't fully speak the local language, right? I got some great advice when I first moved to China that I like to share here. My culture coach said to me, when you first come to a place like China, where it's fast moving and it's different, you will encounter a lot of things that may feel foreign and don't even make sense to you. Try your best not to rush to judge the people or the experience and just think of them as pieces that you're collecting of a larger puzzle. Over time, many months or even years, you'll collect enough puzzle pieces to start to see what the bigger puzzle is about and what this picture actually means. So I think it's critical not to superimpose our, preferences, biases, just experience, right? And neutrally and kind of take it all in, put in all these different data points as dots. And then over time, after collecting all these dots, you'll be able to connect them. So, as an example, I also learned that much of Chinese culture, business culture, is based on something, a term called guanxi, or in Chinese, it really means a network of relationships. And they facilitate business and personal interactions with an emphasis on trust, and mutual obligations. In other words, in China, more than any other place I know, who you know can help you become successful in business and beyond, but it requires investing the time
Mm.
and energy to develop those mutually beneficial relationships. Now, of course, all cultures, including French culture, rely on networks and on relationships. But I think the Chinese system of mutual relationship obligations and reciprocity is extremely pronounced, at least to me. And understanding that early may understand why people approach me and ask me for the things they ask me, and then what their expectations are in terms of my giving back to them. Right. So I think having that kind of mental flexibility to adapt, not to judge prematurely, and to understand what's in it for the other people, not just what's in it for you, is really key.
I really love the quote, and especially that visual aspect of the puzzle. Like, I can see us going from job to job, country to country, collecting all of those experiences and putting them together into this puzzle. I love that you mentioned starting each chapter with a different intention, each experience with a different intention. What was the intention that you set for yourself when you moved to Shanghai?
Well, on the job front, it was really about how do we optimize all of our global investments in China, right? But the personal intention I had was, um, much more personal way. How do I become Chinese again? How do I understand this
Wow.
country that I came from and was born into, and how it's evolved over time? And the differences were huge, just
Mhm.
huge. As I mentioned, I think a lot of Western press don't understand China very well and report about them, at least at the time when I was there, 2008 to 2010, in a way that seems like it's diminishing China. But in fact, I saw a lot of innovation in China. So, as an example, mobile payments were happening in China when I was there, long before it came to the US and long before it went to Europe.
Wow.
Um, and by the same token, even though our company had products in like voicemail, when I got there, I found out nobody used voicemail. Everybody texts all the time. And when I was there, there were already QR codes, on
Really?
posters outside shopping malls that you would just scan and it would give you the coupon if you go to that store.
Cool.
So, there's a lot of innovation that's happening in China that's not captured, that's not well understood until you get there. I don't know how about you, but back in those days, and even today, I'm just 15 minutes away from Sand Hill, where all the many venture capital companies are
Mhm.
located. Um, there used to be dead zones when you drive by Sand Hill Road, and yet these were all the VC companies funding all the, all the technology that would give you mobile internet, right,
Wow.
and voice. But in China, you could be going up a 40-story building in an elevator, and your call does not drop.
Incredible.
Keep in mind, this is like over 15 years ago, right? And people just don't realize that they have solved some of those scaling and technology issues much earlier than other people. So I want to give credit to China for doing that. And so I wasn't surprised when, earlier last year, DeepSeek came out and said, gee, we can make this thing work on AI better than any other system, right? Not surprised at all.
Yeah. Or even if we look at the EV cars, just seeing how much further they are and how much advanced in the different tech sectors. One thing that I would love to highlight, and we talked about this earlier, but is that throughout your career, you've had a very cross functional career. And can you dive a little deeper into this? Was that something that you went into intentionally doing, or is it something that kind of developed? And how did that, help you to thrive in your different leadership positions given the fact that you had all these different experiences working in different departments?
Yeah. I think having all of these different cross-functional experiences, work experiences, enabled me to see problems from different perspectives. And
Mm-hmm.
as I said earlier, I was tapped on the shoulder to go to work in different functions, although the job in China was one that I advocated for and interviewed really hard to get. Um, and I think I was guided by the fact that if you knew how all these different silo functions operate, you could solve a larger problem. You're not just solving a problem in engineering. You're not solving a problem in sales operation, not solving a problem
Mm.
just in customer service. You understand how these different puzzle pieces, again, going back to the analogies, fit together, where people's motivations and business processes overlap, where they are upstream or downstream customers from different functions, and how they are recognized and rewarded, right? Where overlaps may happen. When you get into big companies, you start to see duplication. You start to have central organizations that need to coordinate all of these because they had grown up in silos. And people, when you're hiring so fast, right? The training issue becomes paramount, right? So then you have different audiences
Yeah.
and they just don't know the culture. They don't know how to get things done. And then you have the law of large numbers, which is that you start hiring very quickly a lot of people. You're going to start to hire mediocre people because
Mhm.
they just slipped right through, right? So we need training. We need, to make sure that they are inculcated with a cultural values that you're trying to set so that it's scaled. It scales because then you don't have to be around to make every single decision. Your teams will make roughly the same decision with the same information, right? That takes a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, a lot of working with people. And I find that that is really the common denominator. It doesn't matter which function I went into. I would say that I was a quick study. So no matter what domain I went to, I figured out very quickly how much of that domain expertise I need to have to do my job. And it doesn't have to be super, super deep depending on the situation. So, for instance, a fun story I like to tell is when I first got to Cisco, between my job offer and accepting that and the time that I started, my boss actually said I was going to be VP of marketing for the for iOS, which is actually at the time the operating system for the router.
Okay.
And but by the time I got to my job, it was announced that they would also put technical marketing engineering team under me for that product. And so I had like a dozen people in this organization. And I remember sitting down on the first day and they sat down and they said, well, what qualifies you to be our boss? You don't know anything about technology, right? And they said, why don't you take this self-paced test to see how much of networking technology stack you really understand? And I remember taking this test, and of course, I failed miserably. But I remember one of the questions was, in this old technology, RS-232 port, there are 17 pins. What does pin number 9 do? And I looked at that and go, I don't care. This is not my job. My job is to market this product so that customers demand it, want to use it, know how to use it, how to optimize for it, right? A little technical detail like that is something that my technical marketing engineering team should know.
Mhm.
So I think it's not being scared about everything, but you really have to understand what is it, why is it relevant, why is it important, where is it going, who's it competing with, what are competing thoughts about this, right? More importantly, how are customers going to use this? If you don't understand that and you stay away from customers, whether they be internal customers or external consumers and enterprises, then you've lost it. So I think those are horizontal skills that anybody can learn. But I think I got very comfortable with being uncomfortable with new stuff. And when I got to investor relations and doing my Wall Street job, I had to learn a lot of new things, including a lot of legal language that one had to use. We had to be very careful because I was allowed to talk to the street, and it could change. On any one day, it could affect the stock price. So it doesn't matter what the domain is. You spend a certain amount of time to get comfortable with it to understand how you could deliver value. At the end of the day, that's the key.
I guess it's also that having a lot of interdisciplinary skills, a lot of skills actually are very translational between one domain to another. And sometimes I think we generally have a tendency to go very deep in one topic, especially on the technical side, and then lose sight of what really matters. So I love that analogy. I think it puts things definitely in perspective. One question we were both thinking about is more focusing on. I think there's a bit of a professional shift, especially with early career professionals, about what it means to move across many different functions and how this would, let's say, look on your CV or your LinkedIn profile, and how it could maybe look unfocused. And this is definitely a shift from, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, when, as you said at the beginning, people would start with maybe one career and just work their ways up the ladder. What advice would you give to young professionals who are looking to really add this breadth but also show that they have depth at the same time?
Yeah. So, the advice that I would give is something that worked for me, which is you have to articulate what value you're bringing. And I never confused a job title and a function name with the actual work content. So, and when I had to, I even changed my organizational name to fit. So when I became VP of IT at Cisco, amazingly enough, even though I don't have, a software development and software release background, um, the group that I was in was both an IT and a business group, and I changed the business group to called stakeholder advocacy. Right, had nothing to do with IT. I just so when I went to my internal stakeholders for this very big company-wide project, I could say that I'm here to advocate for your interests.
Oh, that's so good.
I think it has to do with how you market yourself externally to what you want people to believe and know about you. So it could be an engineering function, but if in fact the value delivering is more than just engineering, and maybe you're more process oriented, maybe you are a team builder. For me now, I'm a community builder. You can label it whatever you want, but it has to be clear what value you're delivering. So don't worry so much about what it's called inside the company, right? And I think you have to articulate
Hmm.
how you can deliver value in an adjacent area if it's cross-functional, and how you could contribute while learn at the same time. Right. So I go back to that analogy that somebody said when they recruited me to be head of investor relations, right? We know you can market the operating system. We want you to market the stock the same way.
It's all about how you market
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I would say too, we're at in this AI revolution, right? I think that it actually behooves all of us to have really better cross-functional understanding of how enterprises work, whether it's in our customer side or our own company. And when you're small, you don't really have to worry so much about that, but when you scale, you do. And it allows, people like me to solve much more complex problems. Right? Because I understand how these different functions work. I understand business, process, and technology that takes for these teams to work together. So the advice I would have to go answer Madison's question really quickly is I would say it's even better in the age of AI to get cross-functional experience, right? You do have to have a domain expertise, but that domain expertise could get obsoleted by tools and technology in the future. But there are always going to be functional groups within enterprises to move the company forward.
Absolutely. And one thing that we were curious to have your thoughts on is today we're seeing more and more people motivated to start their own company, motivated to work at a startup. Whereas, even not so long ago, we would see a lot of more people being more inspired to work at a big company. What are your thoughts on this trend? Given that you've,
Yeah.
really seen the evolution of Silicon Valley, you've worked for smaller tech companies and seen them grow to a big company like Cisco. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, my thoughts are that it's really formed also by lots of interactions I have with current MBA students at Stanford University, and tons of people, that I've
Hmm.
mentored over the years. There is a trend, as you said, to move away from established. If they want to work in tech, first question is, do you want to kind of go small? Do you want to go big? Do you want to go for an established company like Meta or Google, or even mid-sized companies like Adobe, or do you want to do your own startup or be part of a startup? And, there are pros and cons to each, right? So if you're young and you don't have any debt or responsibilities, then you can take the risk. Going for a startup is really fun. But I think the trend now is so much towards starting your own company because it's so much easier to do that, even compared to 10 years ago, right? People can hang up a shingle and use AI tools and, have a product ready to go out there, if it's an internet product, to be tested within weeks compared to months or years,
Mhm.
back even 10, 15 years ago. So I think the ability to go and start your own company and have a product ready in these days is what's attracting people to startups. And of course, the promise of great exits. But I think what people miss when they go for these startups is that, especially if the startup doesn't make it, they may learn lessons, but they're lessons that apply to other startups. And they never find out when they work at a very well run large company what scaling means, how to manage that company growth, and what good practices look like, what good professional management practices, business leadership practice, and just running a business. And so I think that working for a large company, not to say they're flawless, but you do get a sense of what it's like to work in one of those. I think some of the more successful founders are actually founders who are in their 40s and 50s, and they've had the experience of
Mm.
many different business and organizational situations. They can learn from them. On the other hand, I have heard that people who stay at big companies too long get too comfortable. Things are done for them and they just have to snap a finger and things happen. And so I think you gotta make sure that you don't end up in that position where you can't be nimble, you can't do your own reports or whatever, and you just have to be flexible. So I think staying nimble, being able to do either would be great. I went to a startup briefly for about a year and a half, and we did everything. We were HR, we were marketing. It's like whatever needs to get done. It's about survival, which is very different than at a big company, which is about managing growth.
You mentioned as you were answering our question that you work with Stanford University. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since you left the corporate world back in 2012 and your involvement with the university?
Sure. I left to take care of my parents who were ill at the time. It's just a very Chinese thing to do. And my
Mhm.
mom's still with us. We just celebrated her 97th birthday.
Oh, happy
Ninety-seven.
But my
birthday to
dad's no
your
longer
mom.
here.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So while I was at Cisco, I got really focused on the Asian leadership gap. So it's this whole notion of the Asian glass ceiling, which is particularly in Silicon Valley, right? You have a lot of these big companies that employ sometimes more than 50% of their professional staffs are Asian. And yet, when you look at the leadership ranks, very few of them are Asian. Now, I know you have iconic CEOs from Google and Adobe and some of these big companies who are, of course, Asian, but by and large, the numbers don't actually support that there's a proportionate representation at the top versus the bottom. So this is something that we
Mhm.
saw also at Cisco at the time, and so I was one of the executive sponsors of the Asian Employee Network. And so through that work, other nonprofit organization working on this topic of developing Asian leaders tapped me to work with them. And so since 2012, I've been working on a lot of leadership development among the Asian professional. And as you can imagine, being here in Silicon Valley, they're just like endless. There's just a ton of people who need help. And a lot of them are immigrants, right? Because they
Yeah.
grew up in China or Korea or Japan or India or elsewhere. And the business practices and the cultural aspects from their native culture are very different than what we see as leadership culture here in corporate America. So, what we hope to do is to bridge those through leadership training that is very culturally sensitive. Right, that's culturally adapted, because the truth is there are aspects of traditional Asian culture that conflict with the Western model, what leadership looks like. So
Mm.
I spent a lot of time teaching that, mentoring people, coaching people. I also built communities. I was the founder and current co-president of the Asian Alumni Network at Stanford Business School, and that's been my joy and quite a ride. I've been doing that for 10 years now. So bringing the community together so that we can provide mutual inspiration, support, and
Great.
visible leadership and solidarity. And so I've really enjoyed all these different hats that I'm wearing, and I'm in constant touch with a lot of people in Silicon Valley and beyond.
Absolutely fascinating. Wow. If we were to go back, you've been through so many different career stages, so many different roles. If you were to think about what these real through lines are that connect your entire career together and all these different experiences, different countries, different cultures, what would you say those are?
I think it's just um, curiosity is key. You know, that's the first thing, right? Your part of your intention is I have this itch I want to scratch and I want to learn more about fill in the blank, XYZ. Um, I want to be put in positions where I'm slightly or maybe even very uncomfortable because that's where the growth happens. Right? Something that, doing something that you don't think is possible or other people think is possible. So the through lines are, and what connects all of them is curiosity. I want to work with people who, are fun. So if they're
Mhm.
not fun, I create fun for them. Right? And so, this whole notion of how do we make the world better is really key too. So every company I've gone to, there's been some sort of productivity or life-changing aspect to how our customers use the technology to improve their world. So that's very critical to me as well. And I think just staying very curious. I mentor a lot of people, but one of the things I get back is reverse mentoring. So I have people who work, whether it's at Amazon Lab 126, doing AI, and they're kind of helping me to understand how they're using the technology or explaining the technology to me. I think that is so cool, right? We can learn a lot from each other.
Absolutely.
And I think being sort of seeing myself as a perpetual student really helps because there's always more I can learn about everything, right? And so the through lines are you just have to like working with people too, not just with machines. So fortunately, I like to do both, and that's helped me.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful to hear. And speaking of liking to add a little bit of fun things, one thing that we do here on Venturing Abroad is we do like to ask a few fun, rapid fire, random, silly questions. And I want to be cognizant of our time. So Madison and I will just ask one each. I'll start. I want to take it back to when you came to Grenoble here in France. What was, one dish that you discovered here during your study abroad experience that you loved?
Even when I was going to school, I went to a cooking class, and I'll never forget the escalope de veau à la crème champignon.
Oh, yum.
So we don't eat
Delicious.
veal. We don't eat veal where I come from, and certainly not with champignon sauce. So I love that, and I made it a couple of times.
Yum. Honestly, it's
Love it.
dinner time here, so we're both getting
Yeah,
hungry.
very traditional, it's not light. I gained like 8 kilos the year that I lived in France, but it was all worth it.
I hear you.
It's normal. Every kilo is with lots of love. I'm gonna reverse exactly the same question, but ask you what your favorite dish was when you were back in China.
Oh gosh, there were so many.
I
Uh,
know, tough to choose.
there's this dish that's very Shanghainese, and it is actually tofu skin. It's cold and it's marinated. And so if you
Oh,
are vegan or vegetarian, it's a
yum.
delicious high protein dish that you get. And the Chinese have a certain way
Mm.
of eating, cold dishes before warm dishes and so on and so forth. It's a very different pacing in big banquets than you find even Chinese American food here in America or elsewhere. And it's absolutely delicious. And now that I'm trying to eat more in a more healthy way, I absolutely go back to that and say I love it. And if you haven't tried it, I urge you to try it.
Sounds delicious.
Is that the tofu skins where they're kind of
They're not twisted,
twisted?
but they're wrinkled, and they're kind of brownish, and they cut them into
Okay.
little
I
rolls,
think I've tried
and,
that.
there's a delicious vinegar sauce that you eat with it too, so
Yes.
Oh, that sounds so,
you'll have to
so good.
come, we'll
I
have to
know what I
go.
might be looking for
Let's
for
go venture
dinner.
abroad.
Let's do it. I love it. Well, Denise, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us here at Daphne on Venturing Abroad. I took so much away from our conversation, all of the different pieces of advice that you gave for entrepreneurs and investors looking to venture abroad, from back when you were young, observing cultures at a young age, to knowing in leadership how to articulate your value, being bold, defining your role, going into each different chapter with an intention. And I just took so much away from this conversation. So I really appreciate your time. And Madison, thank you as well for your questions and for your candor. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having us. And thank you again, Denise. I think we both learned so much. We're both expats living abroad. So I think there was a lot of through lines for us as well.
Absolutely.
Well, it was my pleasure to talk to both of you. I learned a lot about myself in this process, this retrospective that we had. And I hope that when I come to France later this year, we'll get together.
Yes, please. Avec plaisir.
We'll go get some escalope de veau. I'm probably saying it horribly.
Yeah.
With champignon sauce.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you, Denise.